or are you discussing the common and ordinary average man?" "The common and ordinary man," was the answer. "Who is weak and fallible, prone to error?" Bishop Morehouse nodded. "And petty and selfish?" Again he nodded. "Watch out," Ernest warned. "I said selfish." "Well, the average man is selfish," the Bishop affirmed valiantly. "Wants all he can get, true but deplorable." "Then I've got you." Ernest's jaw snapped like a trap. "Let me show you. Here is a man who works on the street railways." "He couldn't work if it weren't for capital," the Bishop interrupted. "True, and you will grant that capital would perish if there were no labor to earn the dividends." The Bishop was silent. "Won't you?" Ernest insisted. The Bishop nodded. "Then our statements cancel each other," Ernest said in a matter-of-fact tone. "And we are where we were. Now to begin again. The working men on the street railway furnish the labor. The stockholders furnish the capital. By the joint effort of the working men and the capital, money is earned." Note: in those days, groups of predatory individuals controlled all the means of transportation, and for the use of same levied toll upon the public. "Very good," the Bishop interposed, "and there is no reason that the division should not be amicable." "You have already forgotten what we had agreed upon," Ernest replied. "We agreed that the average man is selfish. He is the man that is. You have gone up in the air and are arranging a division between the kind of men that ought to be, but are not. But to return to the earth, the working man, being selfish, wants all he can get in the division. The capitalist, being selfish, wants all he can get in the division. When there is only so much of the same thing, and when two men want all they can get out of the same thing, there is a conflict of interest between labor and capital. And it is an irreconcilable conflict. As long as working men and capitalists exist, they will continue to quarrel over the division. If you were in San Francisco this afternoon, you'd have to walk. There isn't a streetcar running." "Another strike?" the Bishop queried with alarm. Note: these quarrels were very common in those irrational and anarchic times. Sometimes the laborers refused to work. Sometimes the capitalists refused to let the laborers work. In the violence and turbulence of such disagreements, much property was destroyed and many lives lost. All this is inconceivable to us, as inconceivable as another custom of that time, namely the habit the men of the lower classes had of breaking the furniture when they quarreled with their wives. "Yes, they're quarreling over the division of the earnings of the street railways." Bishop Morehouse became excited. "It is wrong," he cried. "It is so short-sighted on the part of the working men. How can they hope to keep our sympathy?" "When we are compelled to walk," Ernest said slyly. But Bishop Morehouse ignored him and went on. "Their outlook is too narrow. Men should be men, not brutes. There will be violence and murder now, and sorrowing widows and orphans. Capital and labor should be friends. They should work hand in hand to their mutual benefit." "Ah, now you are up in the air again," Ernest remarked dryly. "Come back to earth. Remember we agreed that the average man is selfish." "But he ought not to be," the Bishop cried. "And there I agree with you," was Ernest's rejoinder. "He ought not to be selfish, but he will continue to be selfish as long as he lives in a social system that is based on pig ethics." The Bishop was aghast, and my father chuckled. "Yes, pig ethics," Ernest went on remorselessly. "That is the meaning of the capitalist system. And that is what your church is standing for, what you are preaching for every time you get up in the pulpit. Pig ethics. There is no other name for it." Bishop Morehouse turned appealingly to my father, but he laughed and nodded his head. "I'm afraid Mr. Everhard is right," he said. "Laissez-faire, the let-alone policy of each for himself and devil take the hindmost. As Mr. Everhard said the other night, the function you churchmen perform is to maintain the established order of society, and society is established on that foundation." "But that is not the teaching of Christ!" cried the Bishop. "The Church is not teaching Christ these days," Ernest put in quickly. "That is why the working men will have nothing to do with the Church. The Church condones the frightful brutality and savagery with which the capitalist class treats the working class." "The Church does not condone it," the Bishop objected. "The Church does not protest against it," Ernest replied. "And in so far as the Church does not protest, it condones. For remember, the Church is supported by the capitalist class." "I had not looked at it in that light," the Bishop said naively. "You must be wrong. I know that there is much that is sad and wicked in this world. I know that the Church has lost what you call the proletariat." Note: proletariat, derived originally from the Latin proletari, the name given in the census of Servius Tullius to those who were of value to the state only as the rearers of offspring, proles. In other words, they were of no importance either for wealth or position or exceptional ability. "You never had the proletariat," Ernest cried. "The proletariat has grown up outside the church and without the church." "I do not follow you," the bishop said faintly. "Then let me explain. With the introduction of machinery and the factory system in the latter part of the 18th century, the great mass of the working people was separated from the land. The old system of labor was broken down. The working people were driven from their villages and herded in factory towns. The mothers and children were put to work at the new machines. Family life ceased. The conditions were frightful. It is a tale of blood." I know," Bishop Morehouse interrupted with an agonized expression on his face. "It was terrible, but it occurred a century and a half ago." "And there, a century and a half ago, originated the modern proletariat," Ernest continued, "and the church ignored it. While a slaughterhouse was made of the nation by the capitalists, the church was dumb. It did not protest as today it does not protest. As Austin Lewis says, speaking of that time, those to whom the command, 'Feed my lambs,' had been given, saw those lambs sold into slavery and worked to death without a protest. The church was dumb then, and before I go on, I want you either flatly to agree with me or flatly to disagree with me. Was the church dumb then?" Note: Austin Lewis was candidate for governor of California on the socialist ticket in the fall election of 1906 Christian era. An Englishman by birth, a writer of many books on political economy and philosophy, and one of the socialist leaders of the times. Note: there is no more horrible page in history than the treatment of the child and women slaves in the English factories in the latter half of the 18th century of the Christian era. In such industrial hells arose some of the proudest fortunes of that day. Bishop Morehouse hesitated. Like Dr. Hammerfield, he was unused to this fierce infighting, as Ernest called it. "The history of the 18th century is written," Ernest prompted. "If the church was not dumb, it will be found not dumb in the books." "I am afraid the church was dumb," the bishop confessed. "And the church is dumb today." "There I disagree," said the bishop. Ernest paused, looking at him searchingly, and accepted the challenge. "All right," he said. "Let us see. In Chicago, there are women who toil all the week for 90 cents. Has the church protested?" "This is news to me," was the answer. 90 cents per week. It's horrible." "Has the church protested?" Ernest insisted. "The church does not know." The bishop was struggling hard. "Yet the command to the church was, 'Feed my lambs,'" Ernest sneered. And then the next moment, "Pardon my sneer, Bishop, but can you wonder that we lose patience with you? When have you protested to your capitalistic congregations at the working of children in the southern cotton mills? Children, 6 and 7 years of age, working every night at 12-hour shifts. They never see the blessed sunshine. They die like flies. The dividends are paid out of their blood, and out of the dividends magnificent churches are builded in New England, wherein your kind preaches pleasant platitudes to the sleek, full-bellied recipients of those dividends." Note: Everhard might have drawn a better illustration from the Southern Church's outspoken defense of chattel slavery prior to what is known as the War of the Rebellion. Several such illustrations culled from the documents of the times are here appended. In 1835 A.D., the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church resolved that slavery is recognized in both the Old and the New Testaments and is not condemned by the authority of God. The Charleston Baptist Association issued the following in an address in 1835 A.D. "The right of masters to dispose of the time of their slaves has been distinctly recognized by the Creator of all things, who is surely at liberty to vest the right of property over any object whomsoever he pleases." The Reverend E.D. Simon, Doctor of Divinity and professor in the Randolph-Macon Methodist College of Virginia, wrote, "Extracts from Holy Writ unequivocally assert the right of property in slaves, together with the usual incidents to that right. The right to buy and sell is clearly stated. Upon the whole, then, whether we consult the Jewish policy instituted by God himself, or the uniform opinion and practice of mankind in all ages, or the injunctions of the New Testament and the moral law, we are brought to the conclusion that slavery is not immoral. Having established the point that the first African slaves were legally brought into bondage, the right to detain their children in bondage follows as an indispensable consequence. Thus we see that the slavery that exists in America was founded in right.